With this video, I'm not going to try to predict what's going to happen over the next month. Of course, if you are a contending team, these guys are going to be critical to win your league in 2023. But instead, I want to take a step backwards and I want to be looking at the long-term outlook of these 29, 30, 31, 32-year-old wide receivers, just thinking, are we going to hit the fall off? Are we going to have to get rid of these guys as soon as possible? First, starting off with the 29-year-old wide receivers, we're going to be looking at a Mr. Calvin Ridley. And while, yeah, it doesn't seem like Ridley's that old, right? I mean, this was someone in the same draft class as DJ Moore. DJ Moore is stepping into his prime. Calvin Ridley didn't get to Alabama until the man was like 20 years old. Very weird, this situation. So Calvin Ridley was actually 29 this season, turning 30 next year. And if you're looking at Ridley, didn't have a great year, right? Average about 4.2 receptions per game, 7.5 targets, 57.5 receiving yards, and about 12.5 fantasy points. So we went over to the RotoViz screener and we looked at all 29-year-old wide receivers since the year 2000 to post similar type seasons. And you saw that the high for the following year at 30 years old was about 14.2 points. So there is still a possibility that Calvin Ridley is going to be able to have a better season next year at 30 than he did at 29. The median was about 10.4, which is just a slight decline from where he was. And then the lows down at 7.1. If we don't include the Dez Bryant season where he missed with the torn Achilles, I don't think we have to focus in on that. So with Ridley, I mean, we can't sit here and say, yeah, the fall off's for sure going to be here. The reality of the situation is he was a low end wide receiver 2, high end wide receiver 3 this year. Going into next year, you should probably expect him to be a low end wide receiver 2, high end wide receiver 3. We will have to monitor this situation, however, because if you go over and look at what we have right now in Jacksonville, we can assume that, yes, Lawrence is going to be here for the long term. Everybody knows that. But the receivers, Christian Kirk will be there in 2024. He has $21 million in the dead cap. They can only save $3 million from moving on from him. They have no reason to get rid of Kirk. Kirk will be there. But Calvin Ridley is not under contract in 2024. He will be one of the premier free agent wide receivers going into his age 30 season. So there is that outside chance that Calvin Ridley is going to be leaving Jacksonville this offseason, which will be something that, of course, we need to continue to cover for the time being. But I'm not going to sit here and say that, oh yeah, he's for sure gone. No. I mean, I would assume that he is most likely going to be a Jacksonville Jaguar. This team went out there and pursued him. This is a team that has Super Bowl aspirations. So I assume he's going to be back. I don't necessarily think we need to say that he is going to be nothing, but he's not going to be a league winner. At least doesn't look like it. Now, going over to our next guy, Amari Cooper, drafted back in 2015, I believe. I mean, he was the youngest wide receiver in that 2015 draft class. Loved him so much coming out of Alabama. Him in Oakland was one of my favorite players ever to root for. But nonetheless, this year, about 4.5 receptions per game, 8 targets per game, 67.5 receiving yards, and about 12 points per game. If you're going to go through and look at the range of outcomes, you have a high of about 16.2 fantasy points, a low of about 7.8, and a median score of about 11.8 for Amari Cooper with this range of outcomes. So overall with Amari, most likely going into his age 30 season, we're not expecting a massive fall off, right? I just want to go through and look at this because once we get down the road to those 31-year-old wide receivers, you will see that the data says that those guys are really going to slow down. With Amari, if you're looking at the contract situation, he is most likely going to be a Cleveland Brown next year. I mean, they could save about $12 million from moving on from him. But if you look at the wide receiver market, I mean, these guys get paid every single time. So I don't necessarily think that the team's really looking to save a few dollars and move on from a veteran producing wide receiver. Now let's go over to Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill is a very interesting player to look at from a dynasty perspective, right? Because if we go over to the flockfantasy.com community rankings, currently Tyreek Hill is number 4 in the community rankings among wide receivers, only behind Jefferson, Chase, and Lamb. In the expert rankings, it's going to be a little bit lower than that. I personally have him ranked behind someone like Amon-Ra St. Brown, just given his age. He's 29, going to be 30 next year. If you're looking at the range of outcomes, you have guys like Marvin Harrison, Devontae Adams, Julio Jones, Reggie Wayne, Andre Johnson, Cooper Kupp, putting up similar seasons at 29 years old to Tyreek. The high the following year was about 24 points per game from Marvin Harrison. The median was about 16.5, and the low was about 12.5. That low is from Cooper Kupp, someone that we'll look at a little bit later. I think the realistic expectation for Tyreek Hill next year is he's still locked and loaded wide receiver 1. Is he going to be by far and away the wide receiver 1 overall again when he's 30 years old? I'd assume probably not, right? More like a mid wide receiver 1. I'd be drafting him probably still behind Chase next year in redraft leagues. I think you'd be closer to wide receiver 3 than by far and away the number 1 guy. So it does come down to how you're valuing age here, because Amon-Ra St. Brown, only 24 years old. So I would probably rather have St. Brown over Tyreek, even if the community rankings currently have Tyreek Hill ahead of him. And over on flockfantasy.com, we actually just had a massive redesign. We've been working on this for months. I would love for you to go over there, just play around with community rankings, completely free. Trade calculators free, get a couple free uses every single day. So yeah, if you ever want to go play around with the Dynasty trade calculator, look at some free Dynasty rankings, you can find that on flockfantasy.com. I'd love to know your opinion of the redesign. And then also, of course, all our premium content's over there. We have so many talented guys making posts there almost every single day. And we have a ton of expert rankings that are behind a paywall. If y'all are interested in joining the flock, code FLOCK will get you 30% off any subscription. And yours truly will make a podcast breaking down your Dynasty fantasy football team when you sign up. Now, going over to our next guy, we're going to be looking at Stephon Diggs. Now, this is when we get into the 30-year-old wide receiver. So these guys were 30 this season, going to be 31 the next year. And yeah, this is about where we are expecting those fall-offs. With Diggs, you had wide receivers like DeAndre Hopkins, Reggie White, Terry Holt. I mean, going out there and getting similar type seasons at 30 years old. The high was 16.8 points. The median was 14.1 and the low was 13.2. So you kind of have to sit here and ask yourself, I mean, with Stephon Diggs, he averaged about 18 points per game this season. If you look at the historical data going into your age 31 year, you're probably going to see that fall off. Instead of him being a mid wide receiver 1, I think you see a fall off to him being more so a low end wide receiver 1. Of course, we're going to have to continue to monitor the situation. Stephon Diggs was that squeaky wheel wide receiver that got himself out of Minnesota because he didn't like it. I mean, earlier in the season, he was making complaints about Buffalo. I don't know why you'd want to leave Josh Allen if you're a receiver, especially if you're the alpha number 1 guy there getting paid. But you never know when it comes to him. So I would be on the lookout to see what happens with Stephon Diggs, but he's most likely just going to be a Buffalo Bill next year. Now, going over to Mike Evans, another premier free agent wide receiver. 2023 is the last year of his contract. Goes out there, has a phenomenal season at 30 years old. 31 next year. If you're looking at wide receivers that comp to him historically, you have someone like Reggie Wayne here as well, Donald Driver. I mean, the high is about 17.8 points per game. You have a median of about 15.7 and a low of about 6.2. So, I mean, if you're looking at the range of outcomes from what we just had with Mike Evans, I mean, he's really penciled in similar to Stephon Diggs to look like on paper that low-end wide receiver 1 yet again next season. Where if you're looking at the difference in overall dynasty values between these two guys right now, I mean, Mike Evans is a wide receiver that in the flockfantasy.com community rankings, is there how y'all are valuing these guys, not necessarily how I am. He's currently being valued about the wide receiver 30. So I was like a mid wide receiver 3 behind guys like Adams, Keenan, Kupp. We'll talk about them in just one second. Behind younger options such as Rashee Rice and Josh Downs. Whereas Diggs, instead of being down at 77 overall in the rankings, is at 44. And the reality is the production this year is about the same. If you're looking at historical comps, their projection going forward should maybe be about the same as well. So I don't know if you would want this big of a gap between the two players. Now, looking at the contract situations, Godwin will be there in 2024. Like I said, we don't know about Mike Evans. I'm assuming he wants to be a lifelong Buck, but it will be something that we have to continue to monitor through the offseason. Now, going over to Cooper Kupp, Kupp will also be a Los Angeles Ram next year. There's no getting around that. He has currently $47 million in the dead cap in 2024. Yeah, he's going to be there. If they really wanted to get rid of him in 2025, but he's going to be 32, then they could save $12 million for moving on from Cooper Kupp. I know it seems crazy that he's 30. This guy was drafted in 2017. Amari Cooper was drafted in 2015, is younger than Cooper Kupp. But the thing with Kupp is he went to a small school, so he had to stay in college forever before he came to the league. But if you're looking at the season that he had this year, I mean, the comps are not looking promising at all for someone going into their age 31 season. The median score is about 11.5 points, which would project out to be a low-end wide receiver too. Now, keep in mind with Cooper Kupp, this is a wide receiver that dealt with injuries earlier in the season. Coming into the year, in the middle of the year, he's dealt with injuries all season. So I would say Kupp almost more important than any of the other players on this list. It's going to matter so much how this guy ends this year. We have another month. If Cooper Kupp goes on a tear and, I mean, he looks similar to what he did just this past week, then these comps may dramatically improve and he may look a lot closer to Mike Evans, Stephon Diggs, and projecting out to be a mid wide receiver 1 next season. But as it stands currently, I mean, the projections aren't kind, but keep in mind a little bit of an outlier just because he was dealing with an injury. So we don't have a ton of data on him. Now let's go over to the 31-year-old wide receivers, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, this is when things are going to begin to get very ugly and very heated. I know y'all are going to hate this part of the video, but DeAndre Hopkins, 31 this year, will be 32 next season. Went out, had a fine season. I mean, considering the context of it, I don't necessarily think you can come out here and say that it's going to be someone that's locked and loaded to be a stud next year. But I mean, he did have about 4.5 receptions per game. He almost had 70 receiving yards per game and 14 points per game as well. If you're looking at the range of outcomes, he had a high score of about 18.1, which was Randy Moss back in 2009. You had a median score of about 12 points, which kind of puts him in line as a mid to low end wide receiver 2 yet again. So, I mean, very strong comps in what you have for DeAndre Hopkins right now. If you're looking at what we have with the overall contract, he pretty much is penciled in to be a Tennessee Titan next year. I don't want to say it with a guarantee, but like I was saying, I mean, teams are willing to pay these wide receivers. It's not like the running back position where they're looking to pinch pennies. And if they were to move on from DeAndre Hopkins, they could only save about $8 million in 2024. So maybe that's something that they look to do. I mean, I assume that Hopkins is still going to be there, but I've been wrong before. I've been wrong. I'll be wrong again. I'm wrong all the time. And obviously the Tennessee Titans know way more about Hopkins than I do. Now let's go over to Tyler Lockett. Lockett gave you a fine season as well. Lockett went out there and averaged about 12 points per game. He had about 54 receiving yards per game, but the comps here, not great. Ceiling, extremely low, about 12.5 points per game for next year. The floor, extremely low as well, about 3.6 points per game. And the median projection, which is most likely what he's going to fall into, was about 10 points per game. So Lockett should project out to be more so like a wide receiver 4 next season. Maybe someone you're excited about in Underdog Best Ball Draft, or maybe if you're in a Dynasty League where you got to start 12 guys, where you're starting, say, 4 wide receivers every single week, and then you have an additional 3 to 4 flex spots. Then there, yeah, maybe you can be excited about Tyler Lockett. Maybe this can be someone that you can go in on. But if you are playing in a shallower format where you need a little bit more upside to make a difference, there I wouldn't necessarily be pumped about going out and betting on Tyler Lockett to realistically do anything for you. Now, moving over to Davante Adams. Davante Adams obviously was put in a very tough situation. Comps to guys like Torrey Holt, Santana Moss, and the high score that we had from these guys going into their age 32 season was 12.4 points. You had a low of 10.1, a median of 11.7. So the range here is extremely narrow, right? Like, we're not looking at comps saying, oh, okay, yeah, Davante Adams is going to be able to bounce back and Davante Adams is going to be able to turn into a high-end wide receiver 1 again. Realistically, going into his age 32 season, that's probably not what you should expect. Adams is on that decline. I think you should realistically expect closer to that 12.5 points per game, where Adams looks more so like a low-end wide receiver 2 for this next year. And it looks like it's probably done for the guy. If you're looking at his contract, I mean, he does have about $40 million in the dead cap in 2024. So there is a 0% chance that he could possibly get cut. Of course, they could end up trading him to someone else. I would say if he stays on this same deal, if he stays with this same team, 2025, when he's going to be 33, they could save about $30 million from moving on from him. So he's definitely going to be cut then. But yeah, as of now, I mean, he's penciled in for 2024. It just comes down to what team is he playing for. Now, Keenan Allen has been the guy that was a massive surprise this season. Of course, everything went right for him. You had Eckler getting injured, then turning into a pumpkin. You had Mike Williams getting injured. You had Joshua Palmer getting injured. Quentin Johnston was a pumpkin all along. So yeah, Keenan Allen, it was the dream situation. Now, of course, when you have no Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen himself is injured, I mean, it's a spot where if you're in the playoffs with them, you're not super, super excited. But nonetheless, he had a great year. He went out there and he averaged about 8.3 receptions per game, almost 12 targets per game, and 96 receiving yards. And if you're looking at the comps, they're great. You have guys like Brandon Marshall, Andre Johnson, Wes Welker. They're able to do this at 31 years old. Now, a common trend of every single one of these players is going into their age 32 season, every single one of them got worse. We do not have a single example of a wide receiver that was this dominant at 31 that did not get worse in their age 32 season. The high score the following year was from Andre Johnson back in 2013. That was about 17.5 points per game. The median was about 15 points per game, and the low was about 11. So I think the median is kind of what we can expect here for Keenan Allen, especially if we look at the situation where this team could save $20 million for moving on from Mike Williams in 2024. Keenan Allen, they could save about $23 million. I don't know if you save that money, though. If you just saw how Keenan Allen performed this year, you probably want to keep him through the rest of this contract. So while Keenan Allen was that high-end elite wide receiver one this season, going into next year, I would be very surprised if he was able to repeat it. And instead, I think you probably have to project him out to be that high-end wide receiver two based off the historical data. But I think that should be it for this video, ladies and gentlemen. If you enjoyed it, please go down there, hit that like button, subscribe, and yeah, please go over to flockfantasy.com, check out our redesign. Like I said, we have all the free community rankings over there for y'all. We do have some stuff behind the paywall, but even if you just want to go out there and check it out for free, there's a ton of stuff for you. Yeah, let me know what you think of it. We've worked really hard on it. We're going to keep on upgrading as fast as we possibly can for you. But thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. I really do appreciate you. Really hope you have a great day, and really hope we get to see you out with the video sometime soon.